Hello and welcome to this special episode of FYI, the BaxterStorey podcast. I'm Sam Wakeham and I'm your host for today's episode, and we will be diving into some really important conversations around mental health, well-being and the challenges that come with the winter season. Before we begin, we would like to advise our listeners that this episode includes discussions about sensitive topics and real-life stories on suicide and addiction, which may be triggering to some. If these subjects are difficult for you, we encourage you to take care of yourself while listening. As always, the podcast description includes links to resources and support that we will be discussing today. I'm joined today by three incredible guests. Tom Oxley, a workplace mental health expert and founder of Bamboo Mental Health. Joe Woodward from our Learning and Development team and a member of our WoW, Ways of Wellbeing Employee Resources Group. And Andy Aston, our head of shared partners and communities and new chair of WoW. We're so grateful to have them here today to share their stories, expertise, and advice. We hope you enjoy the listen.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining our Winter Wellbeing episode. Tom, can you tell us a bit about yourself, Bamboo Mental Health, and what you do, please?
Hi Sam, thanks for having me on. I set up Bamboo Mental Health more than 10 years ago because I thought mental health was a thing, obviously, but was beginning to become a thing in workplaces. And I reviewed, as part of a bigger project for the Department of Health and Time to Change, about 40 odd different workplaces. And I felt that there was a much needed conversation around supporting people. I think that organizations wanted to do the right thing, but didn't know what that was. And certainly mental health as a topic was rising to the surface. It had been in me and it had been in my family for many years, but it wasn't really part of that wider community conversation. So now these days I do talks, I do training, and I review organizations. And I really believe that every organization can support every employee on mental health. It doesn't mean wrapping everybody up in cotton wool, but it does mean being there when life gives us a kicking from time to time.
Thank you, Tom. Hey, Joe. Thanks for joining us. Joe is part of our Learning and Development team and a member of our BaxterStorey ERG WoW, which is Ways of Wellbeing. Can you tell us a bit about why you wanted to be part of this episode and also how you found being part of WoW?
Hi, Sam. Thank you. So yeah, I'm a learning and development trainer with BaxterStorey. I joined our L&D team in April of this year. And it's been an amazing experience. But one of my favourite parts of that is being able to talk to so many of our people about all of the resources that we've got available for them within BaxterStorey. And then a year and a half ago as well, I also joined WoW. I've been on my own wellbeing journey for a long time. I've had a few very low moments and some were easier to move on from than others. So I really want to keep well-being at the top of the agenda for all of my personal and professional relationships. I think at this time of year, there's so many added pressures to our team members. It's super busy. You're working overtime for events. You might be out for Christmas parties and then catching up with friends in the evenings or the weekends. But when everything stops and those quiet days set in, those without support or people around them, they can feel quite lost. So I really want to shine a light on that and what we can be doing to supporting our teams, but also those conversations that we can be having around this as well.
Thank you, Joe. Andy, this isn't your first time with us. You've been on the podcast quite a few times now. As our listeners, I'm sure, are aware, you're our head of shared partners and communities, and you're now the chair of WoW. How are you? And can you tell us about your journey becoming the chairman of WoW as well?
Hi, Sam. Yeah, firstly, I wanted to be on here just to highlight the great information that we've got available to us, available to all our employees. We've got some great information. I want us to talk about that today and how we can signpost our team members to the right places. Personally, in a couple of weeks, it'll be 9 years since I was hit hard, 2 years out of work from a breakdown, from a lot of mentally, I suffered quite badly. 9 years in a couple of weeks. And I guess more than anything, it's about highlighting it's okay to talk about it. I want our team members to feel from today they can actually reach out and ask for help. That's the really most important thing. It's okay to talk about some of the tough subjects that we might hit on today. And I think when it comes to the Ways of Wellbeing group, it's been a journey. I was on it at the very beginning, 3.5, 4 years ago when it started. And I recently come back into the fold and taken over as chairman. And why did I want to take over as chairman? Because I guess why not? It's an opportunity to really change the culture within our organization, make it a positive experience when talking about mental health, talk about the hard hitting stuff that is affecting all of us. We'll all go through challenging times, as Tom mentioned. And I think I want the culture to be positive, mindful, and inclusive. And I want everyone to feel that they've got someone to reach out to and they've got somewhere to go and they're signposted to the right stuff that's available to them, and they're not going to shy away from it. For me, it's personal, but it's like we can make a real difference. Myself and Joe recently just been working on a great project, which will be coming out soon and connect along with this podcast. And it's been great to have those conversations. And I think the WoW group as a whole are doing a fantastic job. It's a job that you volunteer for. And so we appreciate everyone that's on it. So yeah, that's kind of why I'm here today. And yes, I've been on many podcasts. So hopefully everyone doesn't get bored of hearing my voice.
No, not at all, Andy. You've got lots of good things to share and talk about. So thank you for joining us again. I suppose our first topic that we talk about is mental health in the workplace and especially around winter wellbeing. Tom, you've been in mental health for over a decade, as you said, worked with 50 plus different businesses. From your perspective, what are the key mental health challenges employees, and not just employees, anyone face during the winter seasons?
Yeah, well, they've got all the ones that they have all year round, but they've got some special ones for Christmas. I don't know, if Christmas is your thing, right? And there's a narrative that this time of the year, December, is exciting and it's full of light and festivities, and it's magical. And there's a sense that it's supposed to be perfect, and we bring a lot to that party. We make an effort. Our kids, and as kids we grow into adults and then try and do the same thing, and that's just not everybody's story. I mean, it is magical in some ways, but it's also not. It's also expensive and lonely and disruptive and overwhelming, and so you've got those two different forces at work, and all that at the same time as concentrated deadlines around trying to take time off around New Year. You've got the financial experiences of gifting and debt and all that. And you've probably got extra work, particularly if you're in hospitality. Also got this kind of idea that you're supposed to be having a wonderful time and out and partying and celebrating. That's a lot in the recipe for people. And it's not a surprise. In fact, it's very reasonable that we're going to feel that's a lot to take on. We live a lot of our lives already 100%. So you ask me to work 10% more. You ask me to spend 20% more. You ask me to eat 15% more. Like, where are all these percentages coming from? At some point, stuff spills over. So it's quite an intense time for organizations. You might have other things going on simultaneously, like budget planning and that kind of thing. So as Taylor Swift said, there's a lot going on at the moment, and that's just December. So we've also got January and February to come, where we might have laid our own traps for our anxiety and depression because we might have overdone it on the booze and celebrating. So I've got that anxiety that comes after a big festive period. I might be exhausted because I've been burning the candle at both ends. I might be in debt, and it's going to be dark. And that hospitality kind of asks itself questions. Joe said it's being out and having all that festive stuff, it's great, but thereafter, that's what happens in those quieter moments. There's more lonely moments where I start to reflect and I start to look at myself in the mirror, like physically look at myself in the mirror, slap my tummy and realize where all the mince pies went. But also think, goodness me, who are you? What are you doing? So we ask ourselves questions like that. So I think there's a lot going on, and all with the backdrop of it's supposed to be wonderful.
That was
intense.
great.
It's intense.
It is intense. And I think you're right. I think when we talk about winter, we just assume, it's up until Christmas, but it's that backlash of all of that spending, all of that indulging potentially if you are lucky to do so. So we spoke about what that looks like, but what can managers or businesses do during those months to help manage burnout or stress and help team members look after their well-being?
Because it's quite a big one, but I think the principles remain the same all year round. But I think during this period, like knowing it's going to be intense for people, knowing that things are going to be intensified. So, for example, if I am separating or not in a relationship, or if, for example, I've experienced bereavement or I'm in grief at the moment, that's intensified. I think we've got to make sure that your team is a space or place or group where we have a safe space to be able to speak up, and that's actively managed away from the heat of a busy Friday, Saturday night or service or whatever it is. And that's a good theory, but it's about planning in, checking in with your people. It's about multiple opportunities to speak up. I might have 5 seconds with you behind the bar. I might have 5 seconds with you in the stockroom to go, how are you doing out of 10? Where are you at? How's it going? Just to be active about managing this stuff in the knowledge that people are really going to be in the red zone in a lot of ways. That's my first thing. I think for managers and organizations, plan to have these conversations, lots of contact points, and make it clear that you've been there too. You've experienced some of this stuff. Not a big fan of people being vulnerable all the time, as in giving out all my medical notes, but you can let your team know you've been there, you feel stuff, you're there, and if they need you, somebody's got their back.
Yeah, thank you. And I suppose if it was to be in that manager position and someone comes to you with a problem, obviously empathy and listening is what you would recommend, but are there any other additional tools that you could provide or help?
Yeah, so I mean, there are a couple of official tools that people in mental health and workplaces like to use. One is an informal wellbeing action plan. That's something that's developed by Mind and other people, the charity. And more formally, there's something called a stress risk assessment, which is from the Health and Safety Executive. But again, that's much more formal. I think one of the best things you can do today at zero cost is to ask your people what they need, what their needs are. I mean, they are, after all, the expert in what they're going through. So you can, as a manager, as an organization, you don't have to have all the answers, but you can have some good questions, such as, what's your energy like for this time of year? What does good working look like for you? What are the signs when you're not well? What do you want me to do when I see those signs? What's our safe word when something's gone wrong and you need to take a timeout? And what does that timeout look like? So I was working with a brick manufacturer, and they have an expression, ton of bricks. And all you need to do is send a picture of a ton of bricks or say ton of bricks to somebody, and one of the mental health first aiders or champions will come and find you on the production line or in the factory environment, get you away for a few minutes and have a chat with you. It's a lovely little way of just building it into that working thing. So, and I think that's something we can all do with this. We feel so intensely that we have to have all the answers. If I need 10 minutes sobbing somewhere quiet and then I'll redo my makeup and get back out again, then that's what I need. But if your manager doesn't know that, then I might be kind of flustering around going, oh my God, how can I help?
Yeah.
So having that conversation in the cold light of day is, I think, a really, really good way of planning things in.
So just giving your people the space to feel like they can communicate, however that is, if it's through a picture or in words.
Yeah. And on anything. So we're talking about mental health. If I'm in a point in my cycle where my energy is just low, or I've got excess energy, then if we can have this conversation, then great. We both know where we are. Mm-hmm. So I think when we get well-being right, it's not something we do after all the hard work and when things have gone wrong. It's actually wired into the working process. It's an outcome, good work, well-being. It's not just the thing I do with a yoga mat and a broccoli smoothie at the weekend. It's in my day-to-day work.
Thank you, Tom. Andy, Jo, as members of WoW, what are your experiences of working alongside people in hospitality specifically for those experiencing mental health problems, or what support managers on the floor be given to their teams?
I think a lot of it, like Tom was saying, it's bringing that communication and that conversation into the daily working life. People need to feel safe, like we were saying. I think from my own experience, it's definitely admitting that you need help. That can feel like the hardest step. Years ago, I built up the courage to confide in a friend, only to be dismissed and told that her life had been harder than mine. and that hurt. But it did teach me that mental health isn't a competition. Everyone's experience is valid, and we must create spaces where people feel safe to share, where they're free from judgment, because we're all so different. Our experiences, our lives, what we've lived through, you can't comment and you can't judge. In BaxterStorey, we support everyone, regardless of your title or your length of service with us. We have mental health first aiders and all members of WoW who are always open to conversations, to support with signposting you if you aren't comfortable with talking to your manager. We've got incredible resources. I always say Aviva DigiCare is one of the best benefits I've ever heard of, yet alone used. I think our biggest problem there is just making it as visible as possible to every single member of this benefit is available to everyone. So we just need to make sure that we're talking about it. Is it in your pre-shift briefs? Is it in your team meetings? Have you got notice on your notice boards? Just every day asking, how are you? And mean it. Listen to the answers, but then pick up on it as well. Communication is vital, and it's a free tool that we all have.
Thank you, Joe.
Oh, Joe, got all my words there.
Yeah.
No, listen, I think, again, I'll echo what both Tom and Joe have said. But for me, again, I heard it there, but listen, you've got to listen. Don't judge, and show genuine empathy. We've really got, and if we do that, then it will give people the courage to reach out. And I think when someone reaches out for help, we have a responsibility to give them some time, because this could be the first steps for them, to get a bright future. And that's the one thing, when they reach out, if we turn it back, and Joe mentioned there, then we're potentially sending someone down a very dark place. So, I see it as a privilege if somebody reaches out to me, and I've had many, I'm grateful that many people have reached out to me in our business and externally, and we've had some wonderful conversations. And that comes from me, my experience. As Joe mentioned, I reached out a long time ago to somebody, and the world wasn't ready. I just felt like we weren't ready for those kind of conversations as we are now. And coaching, my mentor did a lot of coaching with me. So coaching for me is something that I use all the time, because it allows for vulnerability. Using my experiences that I've been through and sharing it with somebody else, that's where we can start to fully understand the needs of someone who may be going through a difficult moment. So coaching is really important. It's quite easy to do. Find a really quiet room, maybe go out of the office and go for that walk, that you try and make some time to do that, and then be vulnerable with somebody. Don't be afraid to be vulnerable. And that comes through culture change.
Thank you, Andy. I've heard a lot of comments around, like, give your team support and listen, but what if you're an employer or anybody, and you go to someone and you, like Andy said, the world wasn't ready for you when you had that conversation all those years ago? What advice would you give to someone if they go to a manager or go to a friend or a loved one and they can't give you that support that you're looking for, or perhaps they're not in a place to offer support? What advice would you give to that person who's looking for support? Where else can they go? What else can they do?
I'm just reflecting that sometimes the place you might most want to go for your support is not the place where you're going to get the right kind of care for you. And I include families in that. When we have people who are close to us and they care for us, it's inconvenient for them, for you to be stressed, anxious, depressed, low. So they might try and attempt some kind of corrective listening to you. So they'll say things like, oh, but you've got this. Oh, but you're all right because you've got this. They're not properly hearing you. A classic one that people say when you ring them to tell them about a problem is like, so they'll end the conversation with, as long as you're all right. And you go, I've literally just told you I'm not all right. But I understand it's really hard for people to land that. So instead, you've got free, fast, confidential access to those listening lines through Aviva DigiCare. Yeah. So I think that's very good. We do have to understand that sometimes people don't like ringing an 0800 number. They don't know what's on the other end of it, but they are there. We can also, if we need to tell somebody, a great tip is to bring somebody else with you. So there are 3 people in that conversation, and it's much easier to have that adult conversation rather than entering into what can become more of a parent-child conversation. Bringing somebody else into the room with a manager, somebody who's good at advocating for you, good at just holding that in. And people's behaviours are always better when there's somebody else in the room. So that can be a good technique as well. And then the other thing, I'm a massive advocate for is paid for therapy. Now, you probably get access to some short-term counselling through your employer assistance, and that is the absolute lifeboat. And I have climbed into that lifeboat 2 or 3 times in my life, so it's really worth it. But you can also access private therapeutic support on specific things, and you get to choose what that looks like. It doesn't have to be kind of leather couch, tell me about the relationship with your mother and father type therapy. It can be coaching or mentoring, or just somebody who's been there and done it a bit and has got some advice for you. It comes in many forms.
Thank you. I suppose, yeah, you've hit the nail on the head, having that extra support. If you go to someone, have an extra person there, but obviously we have the employee assistant program and we have Aviva Digicare. But for listeners out there who aren't working for BaxterStorey, paid therapy out there that they can reach out for and get additional support there as well. And Andy and Joe, is there anything else you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to add in there, as Tom said, I think sometimes the person you want to reach out to might not be ready for that conversation either. I know it sounds a bit strange, but I talked to a stranger in the end, and it was somebody I had heard of and knew, but I just approached them. And I think, don't give up, because somebody will listen to you. Just in that moment, they might not be ready, but don't give up. I would say just look inside your organization or look around your group, and it could be a neighbor. It could be going into a church. It could be going into a homeless shelter and having a conversation with somebody. Somebody will listen to you. You'll find an ear. So don't give up.
They're trialing stuff in America sometimes where people just talk to bots.
Oh. So
there isn't actually another human, but the act of finding your words, writing them out, messaging, AI, is going to be much more playing a role in this in years to come. That is quite therapeutic to do that, and it stops it being kind of all shameful and suppressed and on the inside, and we can go just get it out. And people also talk to their pets a lot. Dogs make very good therapists. They don't tell you what you should do. They love you just as much. They don't judge you, like Andy said. They take you out for a walk, get you out in the light. I think we could be more dog about this.
I think there's also there's a part of some self-education as well, of like really soul searching into yourself to try and work yourself out. A really good book I read once was The Chimp Paradox, and that's learning how your brain kind of works, and then kind of almost taking back control of your own life and bits, because that's what it's massively about when you're struggling with your mental health. You don't feel in control of your emotions, your actions, or life. You're just along for the ride. And I think learning how to take back control is vital as well.
So we've unpacked quite a bit already, and I want us to talk about the financial pressures that come during the holiday season. Obviously, with the time of the year, there's an increase in bills. There's also the added pressure of gifting and spending money on presents, new outfits for Christmas parties, and all these other things that can be a financial burden to not only our team members, but outside of the workplace. So, Tom, my question for you is, do employers have a responsibility to support their team members during this time financially? Is it having extra grace in this time of year around Christmas parties and all of the stuff that comes around that time of year? And do you think the employers take a responsibility of offering support and resources to help people manage their financial well-being? And I suppose also, what advice would you give to an individual who is seeking financial support this time of year?
I don't think it's always the employer's responsibility to manage our personal finances, in the same way that I wouldn't want my employer to manage my personal relationships. Understanding that sometimes personal finance goes belly up and I get into actual debt. Again, we need to get talking about it. We need to get active on sharing support resources. There is financial support and information available through employee assistance programs and legal support. So it's not just mental health and few sessions counselling. There's other stuff in there. This is really good. And we can get curious about what people's needs are. So, for example, I might ask my team, who's up for more work, who's up for the overtime, who doesn't need the overtime, and then we can try and get that balance. Some of the slightly absurd costs that happen around this time, things like Secret Santas or expenses, people being forced to buy a posh frock for an event or something like that, perhaps even suggesting that rather than having an event that revolves around alcohol and nighttime, we might do a daytime activity type event. There are alternatives here, and it's about offering choice within the organization so that people don't feel compelled to come and do what everyone else is doing. Plenty of people won't want to do that. They might be sober, teetotal, in recovery, we've got no idea. Or they might be obviously religiously excluded. For example, their spirituality might suggest that they don't want to do the booze thing. I just think I'm not a fan of snuffing out the candle on or partying here. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I think you'll provide options for people. And I think in that way, you just stop this conversation around money being something kind of hidden away and suppressed and shameful and humiliating, and you can kind of more actively manage it, at least on the surface.
Yeah, giving your team members the option to choose as well. What advice would you give to anyone who's struggling financially during the winter months? What advice would you give them to seek support without feeling vulnerable?
Yeah, I think get educated around where you can make your savings. Someone like Martin Lewis, our money savings expert, is just such a great place to go for tips and tricks and that kind of thing. There's other charities, and this is quite an unusual sounding one, but bear with me. There's Christians Against Poverty. You do not have to be a Christian to access what is some excellent support and advice around finances. And the other thing is for you and your responsibilities here, that you can say no to stuff. And what we need with that is other people to go, oh, Tom's just said no to that. That's fine. We're not going to have a go at Tom because he's not coming. We're not going to call Tom the mood hoover just because he doesn't do what we want to do. So I think there's a bit of active compassion there as well.
I think you're right there. The peer pressure piece, Tom, can be quite, with most things really, it can be the peer pressure that comes with the guilt, the ribbing, whatever it might, you feel you're right what you just said there. It's okay to say no. And I've recently started saying no to stuff, and it does upset some people, but for the sake of my own well-being and my own mental health, I think it's okay to say no, and not obviously not doing it in a way that is, really, really rude and stuff, but doing a way, do you know what? I'm okay, but I think I'm just going to stay home with my dog and I'm just going to have a nice evening or whatever. It's okay to say no. And I really think that's an important message there as well. It's okay to say no. And I think if it's done in the right way, people will understand. And we should be more understanding because we've all got different beliefs and we've all got different wants and needs now, especially as you get older. You look for a bit more comfort. But no, I think you're right. I agree.
Thank you. Andy, my next question is for you. What other advice and resources would you suggest to team members during this time?
I think the challenging thing is, especially with anything, if you're on your own at this time, is trying to make friends or trying to come out of your comfort zone, because I'm terrible at it. And I think what I would suggest is, first and foremost, to stay connected in some way or another. You've got to stay connected. And how my 9 years have been, Andy, today, has been to come outside of my comfort zone, be curious, and stay connected to people. And that's really tough, because you've got to push yourself to do things you don't feel comfortable doing. There's some great charities out there as well. The Burnt Chef Project, Kelly's Cause, My Black Dog. You can see their social media posts. You can contact them, text messaging, or you can give them a call. So there's some great charities out there doing some great stuff that you can get involved in. That's just free, to name a few. And then internally for us, again, we've got the Manager Support Guide to Managing Mental Health, which is a great piece around, there's a great piece in there around journaling, and I think stuff like journaling is really important. You put your feelings down on paper. So there's some great stuff available to us, on the Vine as well.
Thank you, Andy. A question for you. I think what Andy's touched on is really important about keeping connected. But for those who may be feeling a bit more introverted or may not want to get out there, what advice would you give them to try and overcome that, or allow them to connect at home virtually, maybe?
Yeah. So there's some really interesting research that suggests that social interaction and social connection has better long-term health outcomes than not smoking, believe it or not. So it's that important for us physiologically to feel connected. Right. So massive caveat coming your way. I can be lonely in a room full of people. or in a team or at a party or those. So it's about you understanding where you're at with this. And there's a big difference between choosing to be alone because I want to introvert, because I need quiet, because my autism is overwhelmed by lights, food, hecticness, for examples. And somebody who's gone, actually, I'm lonely and I feel that I'm missing out and I'm unhappy about it and I want to change things. So if your truth, if your story is one where it's all too much for me, I need to ride out these dates and just do my own quiet thing, then that is okay. And it's all right for you to tell people, this is my plan, this is what I want to do. I really do want to see you, but please, can I come to you on that? That's all right. The other side of it is, I'm lonely, I need people, and I end up, in care seeking. And withdrawal from hobbies and communities and groups and that would be a marker of depression. So just knowing where you're at and what you need is really important. And saying to people, I get really sad and lonely at this time. I need to be around people. It would be great if we could do something and invite me in, that kind of thing. And I think it's all right to do that. And then people will be going, yeah, so great. Yeah, sure. Come along. And just to be able to allow somebody to choose the way they want to play this, I think is big. And you have choice. We have agency with it. But I think we so often don't tell anybody that's our plan. And so people are making the assumption that we need to be included with everything all the time, and they just don't. Masked or unmasked, then we've got to get a bit more intelligent, a bit more nuanced about what people want. And when they say, I keep saying this, but when they say, I really want to be quiet, or I don't actually like having lots of presence because I find it really overwhelming and weird. Okay, fine, sure, we can work with that. Rather than, oh, come on, but great grandma is here and everything, and you must do this. Can you just pretend to be happy and all that kind of stuff? It's like, God, beam me up. So yeah, we've got to just respect where people are at. But the first thing is for you to find out where you're at and try and tell people. It can be hard to change that with people. Let's say family gatherings and they've always done things in a certain way, and you're suddenly saying, actually, I find it really difficult. Mm-hmm. And so people will sometimes react to that and go, oh, you got to come, and do that corrective listening thing. But again, speak to somebody in the family who's on your side and try and tell people, this is okay, I'll do this bit of it, and then don't be surprised when I say goodbye at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock because I'm not drinking and you guys all are, or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. Or I just want to get me quiet. So Christmas Eve, I've got a couple of invites, which is really kind, but I absolutely love going to bed on Christmas Eve. I'm a little bit excited. And then waking up on Christmas morning, actually slightly on my own, and just taking it at my pace. And then I'll go to where my kid is and what is docking, all that kind of stuff. But I just need that time. So that's okay.
Thank you, Tom. I think, yeah, you hit the nail. Just make sure you do what you want to do sometimes as well. It's really important.
It is for you, because your version of community is going to be different to mine. It might be your church, it might be your football team, it might be your yoga group, it might be your mosque, right? It doesn't matter. Your version of community is yours, choir or Peloton or even online communities. Do a lot for people, particularly younger people at the minute.
Yeah, I was going to say, I appreciate younger generations may have more of an online community than what we've seen in the past. So yeah, it's important to remind people that you can still build those connections online if you're not feeling comfortable being out and about at the moment.
Yeah, and lots of people are out there ready to listen. I'm part of a group called the Man Cave, for example, and there's regular posting on there. People are just like, can I just get this off my chest? Can I just tell you this is happening to me? It's really, really powerful for them.
Thank you, Tom. I wanted to move on to managing grief and loss during the holiday season, which I appreciate is quite a difficult subject for a lot of people.
Yeah.
A survey has found that, shockingly, 64% of people with mental health conditions report worsening symptoms during the holiday season. And it can be especially tough for those going through grief or experiencing loss of a loved one. And Joe, I know you had a story that you wanted to talk to us about. So would you mind sharing that story, if that's okay with you, and what helped you get through that difficult time?
So coming out of the pandemic, I picked up some shifts in a local pub run by a friend. He needed extra hands, and I needed extra income because I was learning to drive, which is very expensive. But in late 2022, and it was just a couple of weeks before Christmas, I bumped into the manager, Sean, and he told me that Liam, his supervisor, his body had been found that morning by his flatmates when they returned from their late shift. Liam had taken his own life, and then a few weeks later, Tom, who was another bartender in our community, also died by suicide. Liam was in his 30s and he left behind 2 young daughters, and Tom was only in his 20s. Both men had struggled with their mental health. They were good at masking it, sometimes through alcohol and drugs as well, so the signs were quite easy to miss. I think their funerals was the hardest time, and not just because of their loss, it was because the churches were overflowing with people who cared for them, who would have helped them if they'd only asked. But for reasons that we'll never understand, they didn't. Weeks that followed brought more loss. My nan passed away, and my partner lost a friend after a long battle with cancer. So the start of 2023 was incredibly tough. I'd never experienced as much grief, and I knew I wasn't myself. So I had to tell my manager, because I wasn't the person that he was used to working with. And saying it out loud was hard. I felt really guilty asking for the time off to attend the funerals as well. But when I did speak with Ryan, he was supportive. He understood. He asked what he could do. He asked if I needed time, which I didn't. Working was the best thing for me as well. That gave me the courage to speak to others. And that's when, I don't know if I was surprised, but I just realised how many people around me had been affected by suicide as well. I read that a single suicide impacts up to 135 people. And then just this past weekend, I received another devastating message that Jojo, who is a waitress I worked with in a previous job, and we worked together for 3 years, she died by suicide as well. I have some great memories of her. But as I was preparing for this podcast on Friday, I didn't think that I'd have to be thinking about anything else to be adding into the story. The stigma surrounding mental health and suicide stops many people from asking for help. But talking about it and asking somebody directly, are you thinking of taking your own life, doesn't plant the idea in their head. Instead, this can give them the permission to open up and share their feelings. So we need to fight the stigma. As I've said, we need to remind people that it's okay to not be okay, and it's okay to ask for help and support.
Thank you, Jo. I'm so sorry.
It's all their friends and family as well going into this time of year. I always think of Liam's daughters for Christmas, and I hope they're able to change their memories around it as well as they grow up.
You mentioned work kept you, I assume, kept you busy, kept your mind on something else. What other sort of things did you kind of lean on during that time?
It's fortunate in that sense that there was a lot of us that were in the same situation. So we did have a lot of us around that could support each other. It wasn't a surprise if you found one person who was struggling a little bit more, and there was a lot of us to lean on. But I've always found work as a distraction when I've struggled, which I know can be quite an abnormal thing. Lots of people are completely the other way around and can't quite function. Whereas for me, I need distractions. It gives me that reason to keep going, and that reminder that there are great parts of life and we need to share that. For me, sitting at home alone doesn't do me any favours when I'm struggling. Being out there in the world, and even if that does mean that I might be upset and I might be visibly crying in front of other people, I don't mind, because we'll all have our moments. Everybody has highs, everybody has lows. For me, it's been massively talking and supporting each other.
Tom, I imagine that this is a subject you deal with quite a lot. What advice, if any, or support would you recommend those on either side of that story, those who are going through suicidal thoughts and those who have kind of experienced or been through that grieving and loss during this time?
Our job as a manager or as a mate or as a colleague is to keep sending out those little lifeboats to say that, I'm there, I feel this stuff too, and I'm here if you want to talk. When you enter into that conversation, somebody comes to you, it's not likely that they're going to say, oh, by the way, I'm just going to let you know I'm about to hurt myself. I mean, they might do, but as Joe said, you sometimes your guts are churning because the stuff they're saying is not right. It's a bit weird. Somebody's really smashing it, burning the candle at both ends, but not there. Or they might use quite self-loathing or catastrophic language about themselves, and some swear words coming your way, and it's like, I hate my fucking life, or no one would give a shit if I wasn't here in the morning, or I'm a particular burden to others, I'm better off if I wasn't here, that kind of stuff. And that's your moment to go, as Joe says, are you thinking about hurting yourself? But in the workplace, we need to establish what kind of conversation we are having. Is somebody telling me they might be at risk of hurting themselves? Because once we identify that, then we know what to do. They might be a bit shocked. They might say things like, how do you know? Okay, well, the things you were saying were worrying me, or your behavior, some of your behavior is worrying me. And addictions, we might talk about later on, it's a form of self-harm in some ways. So it's all right for us to notice it and to say it. And if they do say, well, I'm experiencing this, or I'm thinking about, that's our moment to get them to the right place for support, which will be professional services, not you. And you do need to tell the organisation that you've had this conversation, even if it breaks your short-term relationship with the individual on confidentiality. So I mean, if you've been on mental health first aid training, you'd probably ask another question, which is about, have you actually got a plan to do this? Are you thinking of hurting yourself, today? And you could identify where that is. But if you haven't done that kind of training, identify if they have thought about it, and then pass this on to the right people. And then that right person, if you can't find anybody else, 999. But if your local HR, the employee assistants, Shout, Samaritans, these are good places for us to have that call, and stay with them while you make that call. That's the other good question to ask somebody is, who would you like me to telephone about this now? And then they can play a part in saying, actually, I've got my GP knows about this, or my partner knows about this, or I've got a crisis response team WhatsApp group or something. So you can do that. For people who are thinking about this, now, we're not here on this podcast to try and persuade them away from their feelings. Because if you start thinking about this kind of thing, you've probably thought about everything else. You probably thought about all the other ways you can help yourself. You are in this place not through fault of your own, but because life has sort of dealt it out. And there's nothing wrong with you. You're not broken, but there's something wrong in your world, or your world is broken, and it's showing up through you and through these moods and behaviors and thoughts. For some people, they are just thoughts. For other people, there's a logic to how I want to remove myself from a situation. I think the world might be better off without me in it. And I just want to say that people have had all these thoughts when they're going through it. It's not that somebody suddenly decided to have a sequence of thoughts, leave a situation. There's often a big pathway towards it. So it's complex. It's really complex. It's just perhaps the thought that I want to leave people with, if you're thinking around this kind of subject, is that when people do hurt themselves or take their own lives, it's not their tragedy to hold. The tragedy comes with what's left behind, and the fact that people do love them and they do matter. And that's what I would think of. And I'm going to be honest with this group of people, is that I've thought about this from time to time in my life. And I haven't planned it, but I've thought about it. And when I started looking around this subject, I came across a page that came up, and it just said something like, you've just searched around this subject. We are here to tell you there's no such thing as a painless. And it just made me think in a slightly different way. If it's not your pain, it'll be somebody else's. And that's a really powerful thing to hear. On that subject, I'm going to recommend a book, if I may. And that's by Caroline Roodhouse, who you ought to have on at some stage. She is the wife of somebody who took his own life without any warning or any explanation to young children. And her book, Daddy Blackbird, is about her journey from horror to hope on this. So get you in all the feels, and it goes into detail about what happened in the process of her coming through this in all the stages. So it's a big one. On the other side of it, how we work with grieving. Well, there aren't 5 stages. There's no how-to guide. There is just, it's yours. Grief is in the body of the beholder, basically. As a trauma. It's not the incident itself, it's how it affects me. There is an amazing book called Resilient Grieving by Dr. Lucy Hone, who's a practicing academic. So she draws on research, she draws on her own extremely moving story about this. And I think sometimes just turning into this subject can help us understand how we can help ourselves, how we can help other people.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, both of you, really, for sharing those difficult times. Thank you. Tom, you touched on addiction and how that can look, especially in the holiday seasons. It can be particularly challenging for anyone battling addiction from, not just drugs and alcohol. It could be anything from shopping, gambling, gaming. Based on your experience, what support can you give or would you recommend to those struggling?
Because this time of the year is one where I can have my addiction very publicly. So if I'm overspending, I could do that because it's the festive season. If I'm drinking too much, I can do that. If I'm taking the drugs, I can do that. If multiple relationships, I can do this all in the spirit of festivity. What that means is I'm doing it in the public area, and I'm then probably doing it at home, depending on the level of my addiction. But I think we need to recognize this. The addiction is not about the poison. It's not the thing I'm doing. It's not the gamble. It's not the chase of a relationship. It's not the drug I take. It's about the chase and that feeling I get, like a dopamine hit. It's the hit of getting it. And so we recognize it's not about the poison, it's about the pain. And that hit helps us manage pain. We are coping with something. And it's therefore part of a process about me trying to mask and hide stuff. The thing that's making me feel this way is probably intensified, and my ability to do it is enabled by this season. So it's really hard. It's sometimes not the season to say to drunken Uncle Tom, can you not drink any more this afternoon, please? Because you're a bit wrecked already. That's not the moment for it. But we can say to people, I'm worried about you. I care about you. Try and connect with them rather than trying to correct them. And if it's you, and this is really hard, but I've been through recovery in different ways. And one of the things that helped me are things like just remembering that I've got a choice. I don't have to smash it every single night. I can set my intentions. Right, I want some big nights. Good. I'll do it that night and I'll do it that week. It doesn't have to be a kind of full-on kind of rocket-fueled month. I can choose my moment. And again, as we mentioned this earlier on, just remember that you're probably laying a trap for January and February, where I'm doing it more and more and more in December. And then I try to do dry January and I last till the first weekend. Or I'm in debt and that intensifies my anxiety and my depression about life. So I then go and do it more. Or my unit count is really much higher and I'm going to need more to get the same hit. You can plan it. And there's some other do you want a couple of little smart tricks from recovery?
Yes,
please.
Eat
early, eat carby, and your body won't be wanting carbs and sugar and that kind of stuff when you go out. Keep a litre or two of water in the fridge and glug it hard before you go out. It will fill you up. It will shrink your tummy. You won't feel like having the volume. And the other thing that I always say is that if you know this is a thing for you, then there are groups, there is therapy, there is advice waiting for you. Those other people will have been there. I'm one of them. Give up in the build-up to Christmas and stop and have Christmases without alcohol. And I haven't had anything for 8 years now. I did accidentally have a sip of somebody's Prosecco, which I had to spit. And I'm still all right with a little bit of alcohol and cooking. So I'm never going to say no to a tiramisu and a bolognese without red wine is just like a summer without sunshine. So I'm all right with it now. And a brilliant book for your Christmas list is Gabor Mate, In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. All the trigger warnings. And the other one is The Easy Way to Stop Drinking. So it's the Alan Carr book, not the comedian Alan Carr. He's written a series of books called Easy Way. There's one about smoking. There's one about drinking. And I think there are others as well. And it completely explodes all the self-justifying reasons as why we do this stuff. There's nothing like good therapy on this to try and find out why.
Thank you, Tom. I think, addictions can affect not just the person who's going through that, but people around you as well.
Yeah, it's all legit. It's all legit. And the effect of this, as you say, so this is not just about you, but it's really hard. If you've got a pain and you're trying to cope, it's really hard to shelve that. And addiction is less about what you are doing or even the amount that you are doing it. I'm doing this when I don't want to be doing it. Addiction is, I can't say no, and I'd like to. Addiction is doing it in secret. Addiction is doing it in the knowledge that it causes harm. That's the problem end of it. So if you look at Alcohol Concern and other organizations, the bit where you're doing something because you're having a big night out and it's planned and it's your 1 or 2 times a year or whatever, that's not it. It's the effect of it, and would I rather not be doing this? That's where I learned that the choice to drink had stopped being my decision on a day-to-day basis. I knew that it wasn't right. I didn't want to do it, but I was doing it anyway. And that's the moment where I thought, hang on a minute, that doesn't add up. Who's in control here? And even after that point, I couldn't just kind of click my fingers and go. I did have a bit of a revelation. I was going out for a run one morning with a hangover. And I just thought to myself, what is your point? Do you want to be well or do you not want to be well? Do you want your kid to be able to hang out with you when she's in her 30s? Because right now, you're not on that right path. And I had this sudden sort of moment where my body just realized that my life would be better without booze. And I knew that I had to get rid of it. And when I got rid of that, I got rid of a load of other stuff as well, because alcohol gets in the way of your decision-making, executive functioning, hippocampus, prefrontal cortex stuff. So that's why we make bad decisions on it. And that's why we do more. That's why we can't say no. That's why we try the extra stuff on it. That's why we make poor relationship decisions. And if I was to give any tips at all, it's about checking in with where you're at with this. You can slow it all down. You can go one on, one off. You can say no. You can set your intentions, and you can tell other people. And this is my advice to the other people. It's like, don't be that person who says, oh, come on, just have a beer. Or if somebody says, yeah, I'll have a drink, and I go, just get him a double. It's like, don't do that kind of shit, because you can really upset somebody very, very quickly. And it's spiking. And, it's a form of spiking, I think, which is the most common form. Alcohol is the most common form of spiking in this country. And it can be very difficult. But to know where you are in it and to listen to your body's signals, there will be aches, there will be pains, there will be bank balance signals as well. Like, don't gaffer tape over these flashing lights. Like, tune into them. They are trying to tell you something. And one of the worst things you can do is when your body needs to rest, and proper nutrition is to go again. So that's what it'll do. That's what it'll ask you to do.
Thank you, Tom. Wow, we've touched on deep topics, and I'm hoping the next sort of area will be a little bit more lighthearted. And it's actually around cooking. Cooking is a major part of the festive time. It can play a really huge role in mental well-being and fostering mindfulness and creativity and community. So it can be really positive, but it can also have a negative if you don't have those community, if you're potentially living alone and you might have that burden of, oh, I've got to cook for one, and that just probably doesn't feel particularly fun sometimes. So I suppose, what would you say about the power of cooking and the importance of cooking in both situations? If you are potentially cooking for one, how can you make that feel a little bit more fun around the festive season? And if you are cooking for a big family and you potentially worrying about financial struggles, what else can you do then to make that easier for yourself?
When it comes to cooking at this time of year, I always revert back to memories, how my mum used to cook, or my grandparents used to cook, and how they used to put fun into it. So they'd always have the radio on, or they would be singing, and it was terrible, but they'd be singing. It'd be a whole occasion, no matter what, if it's for Christmas lunch or Sunday lunch, wherever it might be. So my advice is always to plan ahead. Make sure you plan ahead. If you're on your own or you've got a big family coming over, plan ahead, set yourself up for success. Make sure that you've got total control so that you can enjoy yourself as well, even if you're on your own. So make it an occasion and try cooking something different, maybe something you haven't done before. It's a time to really, I'm going to go back to, if you're on your own at the moment, maybe you've got a work colleague that's in a similar position to you. Maybe just make a pact, cook together. Check in on a neighbour, cook for them. That's a wonderful thing to do as well. Just knock on a door, see if somebody needs something, or you can offer them something. Go to a local church, volunteer. Sometimes you don't always have to be at home, but you go out and volunteer and have lunch somewhere else. There are places out there that kind of do this, soup kitchen, stuff like that. But again, I'll go back to the beginning. When you are cooking at home for yourself, do try and make it an occasion. It might not seem glamorous, it might seem a bit lonely, but if you are on your own, really take yourself out of your comfort zone. Maybe make some bread, maybe make a loaf of bread. Treat yourself, be kind to yourself, have a little treat. I know we're speaking here about addictions and stuff like that, but it's okay to have yourself a little treat on this occasion, but set yourself up for success. Make sure you've got some stuff ready to go and then enjoy the process. Don't make it something you have to do because you have to eat. Really indulge in terms of the preparation and play music, like I said.
Thank you, Andy.
I think that I spend a fair amount of time on my own, actually. I'm self-employed, I live at home, and I've got 50-50 childcare with my kid. So I like cooking for myself, and I actually run a supper club for strangers. So I have 12 people to dinner who don't know each other every other month, and I do them 3 courses, and they put a little donation in a pot. And then other times, sometimes I set myself the challenge of going, how can I get the most nutrients in me for the lowest cost? And really kind of go out, shop, like walk to the shop, buy your ingredients, prepare them properly, sort of put a bit of self-care into the food that you eat. I think that's a really lovely thing. Sometimes I have candles, sometimes I put music on, maybe you want to take yourself out for dinner. How you treat yourself is really important in this. It's not like a toxic self-care, it's how you think about yourself and how you respect yourself and the stuff that goes in your body. Alongside all the treats and the ultra processed stuff, it's going to come your way. So balance it out with some good, wholesome seasonal stuff. I think that's probably my best tip around it.
Put pressure on yourself. Nobody says you need a roast turkey with every single trimming for Christmas Day. Personally, I think by the time I get to Christmas Day, I'm sick of turkey. However, I'll always have space for pigs and blankets. But one of my favourite traditions that we have is we do Friends Christmas. So that's next weekend. And that has grown massively because there's now partners and children involved. But we all choose a dish we buy and bring along, and then you're in charge of making it. So it is chaos because you've got 10 different groups around a kitchen. Everybody's making something else. But there's such a sense of fun and warmth there with Christmas songs, and then we all sit down and present our offering on the table to each other. There's just that warmth of bringing everybody together and sharing a meal. There's so much power in it, and I get so much joy personally from food anyway.
Tom, last one for you. If you could summarize kind of everything we've touched on into 3 really powerful wellbeing tips that you would like to share for our listeners to take away, what would they be?
Oh, there's just 3. If we look at the bringers of doom around this period, which is drink and drugs, debt, and darkness, I think that's a guide of what we should do. So set your intentions on the drink and the other stuff, and check in with yourself, and just recognize that you might be laying a trap for February. So just the booze and the big nights, have them, but don't have them all day, every day. Don't wreck your relationships for the sake of a couple of extra nights out. On the debt front, again, you can manage this. You definitely have choices, and it can be quite revealing about how we work with money around this time. Again, there's advice, there's support out there. Light is very good for us. It really helps our sleep rhythms, our circadian rhythms. So to get outside in nature, you're likely to be moving. You're likely to be with other people. You're likely to be seeing kind of green, and those are really good for us. So it's a very powerful antidote and antioxidant to the kind of pressures and the intensity and the toxicities that we get around festive indulgence. So getting outside is really good, not least because you're doing something positive, but because you're probably not doing the things that are causing you harm in the same way. The difference between you scrolling on your phone and finishing off the Baileys, after you should be in bed, little things that you can do can make a big difference.
So make sure everyone takes their lunch breaks and go outside.
Yeah, anytime. So even on a gloomy day, the amount of light in the air is enough to kind of wake you up properly. So particularly after you get up in the morning, try and get up at the same time. Even if you're tired, have a tired day, and then go to bed at the right time so you don't get out of rhythm. If you're not sleeping, don't do the not sleeping, scrolling, worrying in your bed. Go to a different room, do it, then you feel tired, go back to your bed. Because bed should be a sleep cue for us. In fact, the only thing ish you should be doing in bed is sleeping, but do the wakeful stuff in there.
I'm still guilty of it. I need to be more disciplined.
Yeah, best thing for your Christmas list is get an alarm clock so you don't sleep next to your phone. I always say this, but like going steady is remembering that winter is a good 3 months. So if we think about our being well, it's like play the long game on this. I've chosen to eliminate booze and the other stuff. That's not everybody's story. You are where you are for good reason. So don't beat yourself up about that. But if you need support, you want resources, you want information, there's lots of good places out there. There's people waiting for you right now.
And we'll be sharing in our bio all the links to the books and the resources that you've shared with us. Thank you all so much for being with us and joining this really important conversation around winter wellbeing. A massive thank you to our special guests, Tom, Joe, Andy, for sharing your own personal stories as well.